part of the issue here that I would say, there's the descriptive disagreement maybe, right? Like, what's going on? Are there things that we can coherently like sort of group together as a trend? How should we think about it? And then I think there's a strategic issue. So part of that strategic issue gets into the intra-left stuff, but there's also a part about how like leftist progressives, should think and talk about this issue in general, because I think that part of the problem is that the culture war dynamic tends to be that if somebody on the other culture war team makes a big deal of something, the sort of automatic response is to put a minus wherever they put a plus, and vice versa, and sort of bitterly fight about that, which means that because in the last year, I think especially, like the politics of this issue have gotten very weird. Like if you compare even 2020, when the Harper's letter happened, to 2021, I think there's been a thing where Republicans and conservatives have sort of latched on to the fact that this is a thing that a lot of people are concerned about, and then their strategy is then just to lump in everything they don't like with it, right? So Mr. Potato Head, whatever, like just the any sort of random bullshit that has nothing to do with anything, they'll sort of lump in with that, and it gets confusing and incoherent. But then I think oftentimes the left strategy is just to say, well, there's no such thing. What are you talking about, right? It's not a problem. And at least assuming that, I mean, of course, if there really is, if I'm wrong about the descriptive issue, then maybe you should say that, regardless. But if not, I think that might be strategically misguided. I think that we might be better off saying, like, trying to take control of the issue, and to say, look, these guys can complain about it, all day and all night, but they don't really have any solutions. Whereas there are things that happen within a left program that would not completely eliminate the issue, but I think alleviate some of the harms that it causes. So certainly rebuilding the labor movement, ending at-will employment. I know this is more radical and controversial, but I would also say taking social media companies into public ownership, so that the sorts of decisions that they make about algorithms and stuff would be different than ones that they might make based on profit incentives. That, like, these are things that can actually help, right? So rather than just saying there's no problem, there's nothing to see here, like if you think that there's a problem, that's just because you've been propagandized to. I think like a more of a winning message might be, this is a problem, and here are some things we can do about it.
I mean, I appreciate that. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily nationalize. I would chop them up with antitrust, and I would also part of that antitrust is also just sort of say, like, oh, we're not going to allow for certain algorithms that you deploy. Like, we're just not going to. That's it. I mean, you take it or leave it, that type of situation. I don't know if we want the government responsible for those decisions, because that becomes a huge mess. What is easier is to say, like, here's some regulations that we're not going to allow you're not going to be able to mix from this pile and that pile, and to create your algorithms, because it's anti-competitive, and it's going to cost you guys a lot of money, but there's going to be 8 Twitters. And it's just not going to be as effective for you.
So if there are 8 Twitters, I mean, I don't know how much we want to get off on this, but like, I guess I've never completely understood the mechanics of how this proposal works. Like, is it like literally that, like, okay, I'm friends with Emma on Twitter 1, and I'm friends with Sam on Twitter 2, and I got to remember, which one, or like, because oftentimes when people talk about breaking up the social media companies, like, I can understand saying, okay, Facebook and Facebook Messenger and Instagram can be different companies, but that still leaves Facebook as like a massive, controlling like a massive amount of the flow of information.
If you split up, in addition to Facebook and, let's say, Instagram, if you split up, let's say, the advertising mechanisms, and the algorithms that come from advertising cannot mix with the algorithms that come from your friends. The reason why you end up getting multiple Facebooks there is because none of it is as profitable. And so they don't have the ability to scale in the way they do. They don't have the ability, and you're not allowing them to buy their competitors. So there's a lot more competitors going to crop up. It is going to make the social media experience less integrated and maybe, in some ways less functional, but so what? I mean, it's like, this is my argument about YouTube. Like, how about this? No algorithm. Like, you're not allowed to get the data from your users that allow you to feed them certain things. Like, you can't track what they've watched. How about that? Like, I mean, that's going to make it impossible for us to become, make a zillion, dollar revenue. Yeah, it is. Sorry.
Might hurt our show, though. I mean, like, if, say, someone wants to watch Ben, we might get recommended. Like, I feel like you can make the...
It would, without a doubt, hurt our show. But I'm talking about a solution that is, like, better for society. I mean, I was an advocate for the fairness doctrine, and the people at Air America are like, you can't do that, dude, because the only reason why we can survive is because of format, format purity. And I'm like, I don't give a shit. Like, like, the whole point where we're doing this is to make society better. And
it's better to have a society without Clear Channel or Air America than a society with both.
Absolutely. Like, I'll go find something else to do, or we'll figure out another way of finding our audience. Like, that's not, the primacy of the business model is not there. But anyways, but we don't, that's for another episode. But I want to get into the part that you said, like, training people. And I think this is a really interesting idea, and I never heard it articulated, that you said that being in the wilderness, and it's true, it wasn't until 2015. Like, I mean, we would have Bernie Sanders on back in 2004 on our, and I don't know if there was another national media outlet in the country that didn't have him on as some type of, like, sort of freak. Like, you can see Phil Donahue shown. It's like, look at this guy. Whoa. And, like, how does it feel to be,
how does it feel to be the bearded lady?
Yeah, exactly. And we would just have Sanders on, to on Janine and I on the show, just be like, this is a great congressman. And people would call in and go, like, you're liberal. And I'm like, dude, it's a progressive radio station. Of course I am. In fact, I'm to the left of that. And they would just, oh my God, you just said it in public. And it's like the term liberal, the term liberal went from the from the right, as deployed from the right, was like basically calling someone a child molester in 2005. And now it's like basically calling somebody a child molester from the left. Right. And it is, I mean, the change has been dramatic, but just talk more about that idea that being in the wilderness there ended up being like, hey, I have found some discrepancies in your ideological makeup. Because I mean, for me, I've never been terribly interested in, sort of what, what my naming my ideology. I don't. My ideology has a name, or maybe it's sock dem, but it is. I would see, we had libertarians calling, like, I'm an oncologist libertarian, or I'm a ontologist, or whatever it is. But my point is like, I'm like, I don't care. Just tell me what it is you want to do. But talk about that concept.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I think that's an interesting analogy, because even though, of course, people who are like soft libertarians have far too much power in the real world, the sort of like really special people who would maybe call into this show and talk about how, we don't need to have sidewalks and stuff like that, sort of also maybe knew that they weren't going to be able to fulfill that program anytime soon. So there might have been similar dynamics going on there. But yeah, I think that what I call in the book, the pathologies of powerlessness, is something that can manifest in a lot of different ways, because, and like, to think about like what we're talking about, like, I often think of my friend Daniel Bessner, who likes to point out, like, if you read like Noam Chomsky, and I love Noam Chomsky, no shade on Chomsky whatsoever, but like if you read Noam Chomsky, there's never a point where like on 100 page 97 or something, he says, okay, if a socialist government took power, here's how it would deal with this foreign policy problem. Because during most of the time that he's writing, that would just like that was so far from being something that you would worry about, that it would sort of feel like saying, well, when I'm, enthroned as the emperor of the galaxy, here's what I'll do, and the problem is that when you're in that situation for a very long time, that like you can basically either just be like a liberal, or you can sit on the sidelines, angrily rereading, the collected works of Marx and Engels, for the 10,000th time, then I think it's very easy to start to think about politics less as a concrete effort to change the material world, and more as a kind of symbolic protest against the many injustices of the world around you, and I think that's what leads people to do everything from, if you think about like a certain, I don't want to exaggerate, I think it's a tiny sliver, right? Even if the online left, but like if you think about people who make a big performative point about like trying to rehabilitate the reputation of authoritarian governments, that, say like, for whatever the, Comrade Stalin did nothing wrong, whatever people like, what's making them tick, right? Like why would you do that, right? Because if your effort is to actually try to convince people that like a better form of socialism, which should be democratic as possible, then that would be the most counterproductive thing possible. But if you really want to feel like you're taking the hardest, most radical stand possible against the society that you live in, that starts to make sense. I would argue a lot of arguments about voting, there's similar dynamics. I would argue that some of the ways that people argue about are very attached to sort of very radical sounding slogans that start with the word abolish, but often don't have very clear meanings, is a function of that. And I also think that a function of it is that you tend to get a lot of intensity about very, very small differences, because if you can't change the world around you, you can at least change the little socialist organization that you're in or whatever. You can at least take that over and bend it to your will. If you live in a world where it's incredibly difficult, like this many years after the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed, to get landlords to obey it, and that's incredibly frustrating. But you can at least get DSA to tell people they can't clap, and that scratches some of the same itch. And then I think in particular, it does, I think, oftentimes coincide with, like mixing with these larger cultural trends. I think it does lead to a situation where we become incredibly concerned, with seeing whether everybody else is exhibiting the correct level of moral commitment. That if you can expose that someone who says they're on your side like really isn't, or isn't enough, or that they said something that might have just been a clumsy joke but might have been like a revelation of how they really feel, that and you've exposed them and you've driven them out of the tent, you feel like you've done something politically, when I would argue that you're actually making it more difficult to accomplish anything politically, because you're making the left much less appealing. And it's just and because in order to change the world, you need to build solidarity with other people, and I think that this kind of thing is fundamentally counter-solidaristic.
Well, it's about working backwards from this very specific identity that you've carved out for yourself by, like, I am this very specific brand of leftist, and it's not about building power. It's really, to me, and it brings back to kind of the individualistic point, like from what we started, it's about like buttressing one's own individual sense of moral righteousness more than it is about building power in that way. And I think that's maybe a lot of what your critique centers on, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I just want to add, it's like it's about media consumption habits. People say they're moving left because they're listening to different podcasts, and like at a certain point, like what's the actual work that's being done for the left besides what you're deciding to put in your ears?
And also just like it doesn't it allows you the comfort of being able to have an identity that you've perfectly curated, that is very specific and almost dogmatic and religious in a way that doesn't do anything to further leftist power. And it's like it's almost like a crutch for people who are insecure in their way to digest politics, in my opinion.
And I think that you see it in the way that since 2015, there is a certain kind of leftist who's like mad that like more people are calling themselves socialists. That, you know, that's like that. They'll sort of it's like, well, all these people who really, you know, their politics are not nearly as good as mine, right, are suddenly aligning themselves, you know, with me and identifying with some maybe vague and confused. That's okay when people are starting to move politically. Oftentimes their ideas are vague and confused. That's something to work with, you know, but like instead of seeing that as a good thing, you know, like there are some people who really do react to that, like somebody who's like soured on their favorite band, you know, because they've gotten too big.
I was just going to say that when you were saying that, what reminded me of when Smells Like Teen Spirit came out.
Yes.
I'm dating myself now, but when that came out, everybody who had seen Nirvana during the Bleach tour was like, this is bullshit. And it was like, and it's like, okay, I mean, I get it, because you think they're going to get maybe the fear was like, they're going to get big and they're going to, you know, lose their hunger and their music's not going to be as interesting. That seems like okay. But if the point is to get as many people identifying a vague set of politics that are significantly left of where that you know, that cohort was 3 or 4 years ago, who cares? You know, like, I mean, that people are calling themselves this notion of and really, I mean, like, I think this came up in the first half of the show. Like, at one point, I can't remember where the quote is from, but there was Israeli military who were confronted on their alliances with like the far right. I think it was in Europe, or it was either the Christian Zionists who were touring in Israel. And then somebody said to this guy, like, you know, they're here because they are hoping for the resurrection of Christ. And that means that you as a Jew are going to burn in eternal hellfire. And the Israeli, you know, general was just like, well, I'll deal with that when, you know, Christ comes back. And that's, you know, like in the meantime, I'll take their money and I'll take their arms. And, you know, I'm not.
The Lord and pass the ammunition.
Exactly. Fine. I mean, we can deal with the apocalypse when the apocalypse comes. But like, in the meantime, they're helpful for my political project. Use it rather than sort of like, hey, when we take over and we are deciding who's going to be the ministry of whatever it is, I don't want you in my coalition, because I could tell that you're just not, you know, like, you're getting ahead of yourself a little bit, it seems.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that you see it in like the obsession that a lot of people have with deciding that like that AOC, you know, who, you know, whatever, I mean, she's a politician. I think all politicians are basically mixed bags, you know, but like people who are obsessed with like showing that, you know, that there's like nothing positive about the fact that she's in Congress, or that like other people with, you know, views vastly to the left of the Democratic establishment, you know, are in Congress. And, you know, the point is not that you can't like criticize somebody when you think they get something wrong. Of course you can, you know, but like when it's sort of a strange obsession with showing that's like, no, there's actually nothing positive or welcome there, then to me, that feels a little bit like missing your own marginality.
Yeah. Well, they're also, I mean,
and there's other
stuff going on there.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there's this like latent, incredibly like bizarre, sexually violent aspect of it too. That is just like.
I think that's true too, and I think there's also just sort of a profit motive. I mean, I think there's or whatever it is, whatever, you know, clout, profit, whatever it is. It's an identity, and there's you know, this space is very much about you know, sort of like you know, branding and self-branding and self-marketing and that type of shit. So.
Well, I mean. Yes, from the creator's perspective, but from the people who are consuming it, there is a
I mean, it is probably like whatever you think about any of these people, it is also probably like, okay, almost anything that you can say that would be critical, I mean, not literally everything, they're different people and they don't always have the same positions, but most of what you could say from a left perspective that would be critical of AOC would also be stuff that you could say about Bernie Sanders, in terms of attitudes towards the Biden administration, in terms of some places where you might wish that, they were less like normie Democrats, but I think the fact that one of these is is an old man, and and the other is an attractive woman, it's like this. I don't think you need to be Sigmund Freud to think that there's like something going on there that that exacerbates it in a lot of cases. But also, I do think that like there's something like that the fact that people are this eager to say that anything that looks like a victory can't be, is revealing in itself. Because if your goal is to have achieve give everyone health care and end the wars and further down the line do things that are more radical than that, then having as many people as possible elected who share as many of those goals as possible would be all to the good. And even if you do disagree with them about certain things, you'd present that in a different way than you would when you're denouncing your bitter enemy.
Right. I mean, and just to say, like in the context of the $1.9 trillion bill that was passed, on one hand, I cannot come up with a less efficient, more corruptish prescription to get people health care than to have the government subsidize Cobra. It's atrocious. It's atrocious. But at the other time, like, it's good that millions of people are going to get free health care for this period of time. Like, that is good. And I think we have to sort of like recognize that is good. The way that it's done is horrible, and you can also say that it was done that way because of how desperately afraid they are of setting up a better, a more efficient, and also more equitable system. But
yeah, if people start getting government directly from the government, they'll get used to it.
Yep. All right. Well, Ben Burgis, real pleasure. We should do this again. Thank you so much for joining us. Folks can find Give Them an Argument. When would people find that? On Mondays?
Yeah, Give Them an Argument is on Mondays at 8 p.m. Eastern. So that's and then there are other things going on during the week, but that's the main show is at 8 p.m. Eastern on Monday. And I guess just throw in a quick plug if you do want to buy the book, Canceling Comedians While the World Burns. Whereas I would rather that people buy it from Amazon than not buy it. I'd also say that if you would like it to be packaged and shipped by people who aren't peeing in bottles because they're trying to meet quotas enforced by constant electronic surveillance, Red Emma's is a worker-owned bookstore in Baltimore that will ship it. You can order it from online. So that's redemmas.org.
All right, we'll put a link to the book at Red Emma's in the podcast description and the YouTube description. And we'll also just throw in a link to some folks we know who just pee in bottles, and we'll send those to you.
Well, I mean, it's fine if you're peeing in bottles because you enjoy it. I mean, like if you just, that's your preferred place to pee, I'm sure you can do that if you work at a co-op. But if you do have the preference to walk to the bathroom and then wash your hands and walk back and all that stuff, I do feel like that's something you should be able to do.
I'm glad as a show we're normalizing the peeing bottle fetish, right? I mean, so many people close to me have told me it's like, this whole Amazon fight, right? It's caused real discrimination.
Yeah, no problem.
Ben Burgis, thanks again.